Okay, we're continuing about halfway through chapter 4, and we left off where the sign stealing crew had just returned with their big prize, the highway sign from the overpass. Okay, and so the last paragraph with John Gockley saying, "Yep, we just moseyed down with the truck. Ty jumps out. They all get in. Went like clockwork. That was fun. Get me a beer," John Gockley said. That had that had been only 3 years ago. As Stephen lay in bed, his thoughts went back. Uh, his thoughts went back and forth between Holmes and Jesse and the sign stealers. Stephen tried to remember if he'd felt any foreboding, any feeling at that time that the days of the fort would soon end. He realized that he had not, and that he should have. He had not noticed the line that the boys had crossed once they gotten their driver's licenses. A stop sign or a moose crossing sign from some back road somewhere could go unnoticed and might be regarded as a prank, but a big green sign from a highway overpass would definitely be missed, and and it had been too big to fit inside the fort, and so was just left face down in the woods. Stephen had pointed that out and asked Billy why he had wanted to go through such a hassle and such a risk to get it. "Because it was there," Billy had said. Stephen had simply tipped his head and said, "I see. Fair enough." In October of that same year, the year most of them had turned 16, the night of Friday the 13th started as most Friday nights had for the previous 2 or 3 years. They had built a fire on the edge of the field near the fort in the afternoon after school. Kids dropped by one, sometimes 2 or 3 together. Soon there were about 20 boys. Some of them were passing a football around. As night fell, Stephen and Tom Larch sat by the fire, Tom drinking Canadian mist whiskey, Stephen drinking Narragansett beer. Then, when it was dark, most of the boys joined them around the fire in the frosty air. Then, from the bottom of the field, Stephen saw 2 people walking up toward them using a flashlight. Stephen assumed, as did everybody, that it was just some latecomer kids. As a joke, Stephen shouted, "Cops!" and all the kids scattered into the woods, trying to escape to the other side of the road. They knew that once they got across the road, they knew the trails and could get away. Stephen and Tom were laughing because Stephen had only been joking. But then, as the 2 latecomers got closer, Stephen saw that they were not boys. They were men. Then the beam of their flashlight briefly illuminated the blue stripe on a trouser sleeve. It was the police. But it was too late for Stephen or Tom to run away. The officers walked to the edge of the fire, shined their lights in the 2 boys' faces and to the beer and whiskey. Stephen and Tom stood up. One officer kept watch on them, while the other searched the woods to catch the boys who'd run away. 2 more police cars arrived at the road from opposite directions, blue lights flashing. They stopped in the road about 50 yards apart, illuminating the escape route across the road with their headlights. In searching the woods, one officer's flashlight beam swept across the fort, and through the window caught the gleam of traffic signs, and that became the focus of their attention. Police radios buzzed with action. Some of the boys were caught trying to hide in the woods, not having reached the road in time. Several were caught trying to run through the headlight beams to the other side. The boys who'd made it across the road before the 2 police cars had arrived had escaped. 10 boys were arrested that night. 10 had escaped. Stephen's father came to the police station that night to pick up his son. Stephen's parents had been so angry they forbade him from ever staying at the Larches' house again or associating with any of the boys of the fort. Stephen would have to find a new circle of friends. In fact, Stephen realized, now looking back on it, that perhaps it had been just as well. By the beginning of high school, he had noticed differences between himself and his friends from the fort. Stephen remembered when a new boy had started school. His name was Neil. He had dark skin. He and his family were from India. Billy Crow had whispered something under his breath about the new nigger boy. He had used that word. Stephen had sneered at Billy, calling him a racist, but Stephen recognized that he'd had no support from the other boys on that point. Yes, Stephen acknowledged it had been just as well that he'd had to find a new group of friends. A few days later, Mr. Stroh accompanied Stephen to the police station for questioning. The interrogator was Sergeant Peter Duggan. Duggan had recently been in the newspaper because while on patrol, he had hit and killed a stray cow that had been in the road at night somehow. He was a pudgy man, perhaps 60, with a wrinkled red nose, rosy cheeks, and a voice that was unnaturally high and squeaky for a man of his size, Stephen thought. There in the station, Duggan leaned back in his chair, squinted across his desk at Stephen. 15 seconds passed before he spoke. It seemed like forever. He cracked his knuckles, trying to appear as if he were sizing up his adversary. Mr. Stroh sat motionless. He was not inclined to be sympathetic with Stephen in this matter. Stealing those signs was a crime, and if Stephen had been involved, Stephen would have to pay the price. Mr. Stroh kept quiet and let the officer do his job. Stephen was aware that the incident, having made the front page of the New Dartford Bureau with a photo of the fort, had shortened his father's patience. Duggan finally leaned forward, opened a folder, and took out a photograph of the fort. It was the same photo that had been in the newspaper. "How high off the ground would you say this treehouse is?" Duggan asked. "I never measured it, but I'd say 40 or 50 feet, Stephen replied, truthfully. Duggan smirked and leaned back in his chair, apparently feeling the satisfaction of having caught Stephen in a lie. Then he turned to Mr. Stroh and referred to the photograph. "Judging by the number of rungs on the ladder, I would say this tree house is no more than 15 feet off the ground." Mr. Stroh studied the picture carefully. After a few seconds, he calmly asked Duggan if he had ever seen the treehouse himself. Duggan replied that he had not, but added that it wasn't necessary, as he'd had training in the interpretation of such photographs. Mr. Stroh told Officer Duggan that he himself had seen the treehouse many times when he'd come to pick up Stephen. Your method of ascertaining the height of the fort is flawed," Mr. Stroh said. He pointed to the photograph. "That's not a ladder at all. Those are 2x4s spaced about 4 feet apart. My son is telling the truth." Stephen recognized in his father an interesting quality, that he had refuted Duggan's assertion while showing no disrespect. He'd pointed out the flaw in the same manner as a colleague might offer helpful analysis. Stephen's father had concluded that whatever training Duggan had had, he had not been trained in police interrogation methods, but he kept a perfect poker face, revealing no contempt at all. Stephen admired that, and also appreciated that his father had stood up for him. Stephen himself was surprised at the ineptitude of the questioning. He had expected it to be difficult to avoid having to reveal the names of boys who'd gotten away that night, or where they had gotten the liquor. Stephen had resolved to himself that whatever Duggan threatened to do, Stephen would not reveal any names, whatever the consequences. He would never rat on his friends. That was a matter of honor. To his great surprise, somehow those questions never came up. Stephen hadn't even had to lie. "Have you ever smoked a roach in the tree house?" Duggan had asked. Stephen answered with a straight face the honest truth that he had not. He stopped himself from adding that he had not smoked insects of any kind in the tree house. When the silly questions about details of the structure of the fort became tedious, Mr. Stroh stood and said to Duggan, "Well, it seems you've got all the information you need. Shall we wrap it up?" Stephen noticed that his father's tone was that of a superior officer approving of a job well done of a junior officer. Duggan gave a satisfied look, shuffled his folders, and dismissed them. In the car on the ride home, Stephen warmed to his father. "Dad, thanks for standing up for me in there." "Well, Stephen, I had a few scrapes when I was your age too. Nothing this bad, but I wasn't any goody two-shoes. Anyway, that Duggan is clearly an ass," he said. They laughed together. They were silent for the rest of the ride home. It was not an uncomfortable silence. Stephen just looked out at the road, thinking, while his father drove. He knew that this whole situation was very bad. There would be a trial in a few days. He realized that he was still a juvenile, so it would not destroy his life completely. But he knew he'd known better than to be in a situation like what had happened that night. How many years had gone by since Stephen had first objected to the sign stealing? When his objections had been scorned, why had he not left the group? He himself had said it was only a matter of time. Had he not believed his own words? Mr. Stroh was calm, just driving. He wasn't happy, that was clear, but he also wasn't shouting or lecturing. Stephen's father had often shouted over small things, but this time, when it was a big thing, he was serious and stern, but also Stephen's ally. Stephen had never seen this side of his father's character. 1 week later, Stephen and his father had to go to the town hall where the court was, for what they'd said was a pre-trial arraignment. As they arrived, the other kids were arriving too, with their fathers. All of the kids wore suits and ties. It was a somber occasion. There were curt greetings, and that was all. Court began at 6 o'clock. Stephen and his father went into the courtroom and sat down on the pew. Stephen noticed that the courtroom was arranged just like a church, with wooden pews and a wooden fence that separated the judge from everybody else. It even had the same smell, like the same kind of varnish. A police officer was positioned just like an altar boy at church would be. On the other side of the altar sat a lady using a stenographer. The judge's place was in the middle, between them. The lady announced the entrance of Judge Franklin. "All rise." Stephen was amazed. It was just like church. Judge Franklin walked in, dressed in a black robe. Stephen thought to himself how funny it was that the priest in church had a mostly white robe, but the judge had a black robe. He wondered how it got to be that way. Judge Franklin told everybody they could sit down. He sat down, put on his glasses, and looked at the folder on his desk that that had the list of cases to be heard that night. That was the docket Stephen had learned in civics class in school. Stephen knew that Judge Franklin was the son of Mrs. Franklin, whose mailbox he'd blown up so many years before. Stephen hoped Judge Franklin would not have any suspicion about him. It occurred to Stephen that had he been caught for that, things would have been a lot worse this time. He hoped there would be no problem from that. Judge Franklin sorted his papers and announced the first case. Good evening to all of you. Court is in session. He tapped the gavel. Tonight we begin with the case of, he adjusted his glasses to read, Thomas Larch, Kenneth Larch, William Crow, Stephen Stroh, Darrell McBain, Stephen Spain, Tyrone Jacobs. And he continued through the list of the 10 boys, all facing the charge of grand larceny. In the case of, he adjusted his glasses again and looked closely at the docket, stolen traffic signs. Friday the 13th of October of this year. He looked up to the gallery. Before we begin with tonight's proceedings, do any of you have a statement to make before the court? He asked. After a few seconds, Billy Crow stood up. Your Honor, I have a statement to make, Billy said. And you are? Judge Franklin asked. William Crow, Your Honor. Go ahead, said Judge Franklin. Well, the guys and me have all talked it over. Billy looked to the other guys, and we think Stephen Stroh and Thomas Larch should not be here. And why is that? Judge Franklin asked. Because every time we went out to steal signs, they tried to talk us out of it. And we had, Billy struggled to find the right word, we had ridiculed them, Your Honor. Judge Franklin sat for a few seconds and focused on one of the papers. Then he looked up to the people in the courtroom. Very well, he said, looking down at the paper. Thomas Larch and Stephen Stroh, you are free to go. But I suggest you use this experience as an opportunity. It's time to grow up. And he tapped the gavel. Stephen and his father rose from their pew. On his way out, Stephen tipped his head to Billy Crow in a muted gesture of respect. Mr. Stroh turned to Billy and made the same gesture, albeit with a stern face. Stephen and his father left the courtroom, as did Tom Larch with his father. Outside, there was no talking. They each walked to their cars, got in, and drove off. Stephen felt he shouldn't say anything. He was grateful for Billy Crow's sacrifice. He also knew that his father would respect what Billy had done. Stephen knew his father realized that he had tried to do the right thing. Then Mr. Stroh spoke. Well, that was an honorable thing for that Crow boy to do. He's got some guts, Mr. Stroh said. And so do you. Stephen kept silence. You know, in the Navy, at one point I was a JAG. That's a Judge Advocate General. Those are lawyers in military courts martial. I defended guys in a few cases. That and doing shore patrol were some of my favorite duties in the Navy, Stephen's father said. Okay, that's the end of chapter 4.